Ready. We are live. Well, got finished with the unifying force since I may or may not have COVID. We'll see tomorrow when I get tested. But, finished unifying force. But before I go to Dark Nest, I have a fan fiction by hand of HOT45. Decades after becoming reluctant leader of the Empire in its war against the rising New Republic, Gilead Pelion becomes head of the Galactic Alliance Navy and must teach former Imperials and rebels to fight together. However, a series of attacks on Imperial convoys threatens to restart the conflict, and Pelion must choose between loyalty, his empire, or peace. This is a novel in two parts, one set before the Legacy of the Force series and one set during the war between the Empire and New Republic. Jason Fry's Essential Guide to Warfare expanded on a lot of details about previously unexplored corners of the conflict. And it was a lot of fun dramatizing those for the flashback parts of the novel. Present day part, take a look at old enemies who find themselves working together in a crisis that makes everyone re-examine loyalties. This one is for fans of Pelion, the X-Wing books, and the military side of the Star Wars in general, and for people like the author who spend way too much time looking at battles and worship specifications of Wikipedia. So people like my friend Ghostfish, because that's not me, bro. Also, Merry Christmas Eve. If you're in the given spirit, Twin Suns Foundation. You could go to the donate page. Go do that. This is really the only thing I want to do for my birthday. But also Christmas. It's the spirit of giving. You could, in the link in the description, leave some money to Twin Suns. You know, whether it be $1 or whatever. You know, so kids in hospitals can have some fun. But I figured people would be busy today. I'm only going to do it chapters, but you see how Hand of HOT45 does with this first chapter. The narrow probe, the Super Star Destroyer Guardian, slipped through space. Its gray and black dagger, 19 kilometers long, passed in front of Corellia's primary sun and draped a blurred, narrow shadow across the cloudy face of the world's northern hemisphere. A squadron of starfighters from Corellia's local defense force broke free of the planet's orbit and vectored directly toward the massive warship. They remained on an intercept course until the very last minute, and when they swung their nose 90 degrees, kicked their afterburners to full, and lanced forward, they trailed ribbons of vapors that ignited under engine flare and glowed brilliant, twisting streaks of red and white as they raced past the ship's midsection observation deck. The starfighters finally slowed to settle in two graceful columns just beyond Guardian's bow, dangling, flashing light streams behind them. It was understated, but graceful honor guard. It was an understated but graceful honor guard, Corellia's contribution to the funeral procession that would lead its most honored son home. I believe they are. I'm in my room, so. And the only reason I have the Mortis Sun is because of the recent Super Lit with Marcel the Revanchist, so you should definitely go watch that if you have any interest whatsoever in supernatural encounters. Go subscribe to Revanchist. He's much better than me. But yeah, that's why I have the current image that I have. As he stood on the transpersistale domed observation deck built into Guardian's forward superstructure, Grand Admiral Gilead Pelion watched those twirling lights and allowed himself the grim indulgence of wondering what kind of funeral he would get when his time came. Like the man they laid to rest today, Pelion had been born on Corellia. But unlike him, he spent most of his life disconnected from the planet. He lived on other worlds, Coruscant, Annexus, Carida, Bastion. But his real home was always the ships he commanded, over a career spanning almost 60 years. Not Guardian, though. The beautiful giant was best anyone knew, the last surviving vessel of the Executor class to roll off the Empire's shipyards, but she had been abandoned by her owners. Later captured and slowly refitted by the New Republic, now she was the largest ship in the Galactic Alliance Navy, though her armor and armaments were nothing like what they'd been when she was first built. There was no need for them. She guarded a galaxy at peace. Gilead Pelion stood at the head of an assembly that gathered too many legends and luminaries to count. It seemed like they had converged the Corellia from all corners of government across the galaxy. It was historic, just having them all here. Down at the end of the line, there was Wedge Antilles. In the red-sashed Alliance dress uniform he must have pulled out of the closet of whatever home he'd been enjoying retirement in, down on Corellia. Next to him was his inseparable partner Tycho Selku, still acting as a senior advisor in the Alliance Navy. Besides those old men were the newer breed, Cha Nathal and Nek Boitu, Mon Calamari and Bothan. I believe these are characters from the Legacy of the Force. Symbols of the influence of their two races, but also highly talented admirals in their own right, and best to come up through the Alliance ranks since the end of the Yusong Vong War 7 years ago. 7 years ago. So is this going on exactly along the time of Dark Nest, or is this happening after Dark Nest during the other 5-year gap? Because if this is happening during the other 5-year gap before Legacy of the Force, then I'm reading this out of order, which isn't inherently bad, but but I do want to write down, because I'm reading this, and I'm going to be doing a review for it, so Shine Thaw. I'm like in school again. And Neck. Because I believe they're characters in those books. So I'm going to write them down. Okay. Because Nathal ends up working with Jason, if I remember correctly. So. And there were others in the line, all members of the Galactic Alliance, but wearing the uniforms of their constituent navies. There's Admiral Lenola Bass, tall and stately in the blue uniform of the Hapen Royal Navy. Further back, the thick-bodied, violet-skinned Dornian General Itan Abat from the Black Fleet Crisis, part of a long-lived race. Abat probably represented more years of combat experience than anyone assembled today, even Pelion himself. Beside him was another Boffin, the white-furred Trieste Crefi, who had been caught between political pressures after the end of the Yusong Vong War and resigned his alliance commission. He wore a trim black civilian suit that contrasted greatly with his snowy fur. Pelion wore his white Grand Admiral uniform, complete with gold epaulets. The cut of the uniform was standard Imperial design, but the rank badge on his chest bore the marks of the Supreme Commander of the Galactic Alliance Armed Forces. Standing beside him was Tur Fenir. Like Antilles, the retired fighter ace must have dug his uniform out of a closet. Imperial in design, it was colored deep black, save for the red blood stripes running down either side, marking the owner as part of the elite 181st Fighter Wing. Pelion and Fenrir were the only two representatives wearing the uniforms of the Galactic Empire today, or as the other beings here usually called it, though rarely to his face, the Imperial Remnant. The vast union that had once encompassed most of the known galaxy had been reduced to 2 drops in an ocean, and Pelion was no longer sure he regretted it. He didn't speak his thoughts to Fenrir. He didn't speak to the man at all as they waited for the funeral ceremony to begin. Even when they'd fought on the same campaigns, there'd been little for them to speak about. They'd always been 2 different kinds of Imperial. Thankfully, Pelion didn't have to stand awkwardly beside Fenrir for long. The murmured conversations in the assembled crowd hushed to nothing as 3 humans walked onto the stage at the front of the observation deck. Against a wonderful backdrop of stars, gleaming exhaust trails in Corellia's soft glow, they took their place at the podium. On one side, Cal Omos, Chief of State of the Galactic Alliance. On the other, Adil Saxon, Prime Minister of the 5 worlds of the Corellian system. And finally, in the center, stood Leia Organa Solo, who I thought was done with politics. It had been 40 years since Pelion had watched holo broadcasts of the willful young woman giving speeches before the Imperial Senate. Decades had turned her hair gray and wrote wrinkles on her face, but she still possessed the poise and confidence she had as a precocious teenager. "We are gathered here today," she said, "to commemorate the life of the last great leader of the Rebel Alliance." Fenrir made an unhappy sound deep in his throat. Pelion understood the feeling, but said nothing. Behind the podium, a hollow image blazed to life and loomed over the crowd. It was a head and shoulders view of a man none of them would ever forget. The hollow, taking somewhere in the waning of the man's middle age, showed a wide mouth beneath a gray mustache, a forehead creased in concentration, and thick eyebrows drawn together over a pair of intent, probing eyes. Oh, they lost Gar. I mean, that makes sense. He's not in any stories after this, so that's not a contradiction. But if he's not around, might as well. I mean, he's pretty old anyway. Garmbelobus funeral. All right. It's his funeral. That makes sense. In losing Garmbelobus, Leia said, the galaxy loses its last living reminder of the great bravery it took to stand against the oppression of Emperor Palpatine. Belobus was a senator famed and respected across the galaxy before I was even born. He was a close ally to my father and a constant inspiration to me since childhood. He inspires me still the same way he did 50 years ago. Through his principled stands, his brave actions, his sharp intelligence, and deep wisdom. In losing Garmbelobus, we've lost an essential piece of history. But the galaxy we live in today is one he created along with my father and Mon Mothma when they signed the Corellian Treaty and formally created the Alliance to restore the Republic. Just checking. I'm surprised there's even one person watching. We are not here today to grieve. Garmbelobus lived a long life and died peacefully in a galaxy that was peaceful and free. We are here to commemorate this great man and celebrate that we now live his dream. As Leia stepped back from the podium, the crowd began to applaud. The old rebels like Antilles and Selko clapped the loudest. The young ones like Boite and Nathil were only slightly less enthusiastic. Ones without direct experiences in the Imperial Alliance War, like Admiral Bass, applauded more dutifully. Pelion glanced askance and saw Fenrir with his hands at his side, back stiff, watching the podium with an unreadable expression. A part of Pelion wanted to join the applause. It was an overwhelming rush that threatened to sweep him along, but he held himself. On one level, it felt like mockery that he was here at all, celebrating the life of a man who brought down the government he served for over 50 years. On another level, it felt right to pay respect. Belobus had been an honorable man and a capable adversary. If an enemy was ever deserving of respect, it was Belobus. But because Fenrir did not applaud, he didn't either. If nothing else, it would save him embarrassment back on Bastion, where the Moff Council was surely watching the broadcast of this event with gnashing teeth and seething anger, yet another reminder of how far the Empire had fallen. Leia was replaced at the podium by Prime Minister Saxon. She gave a very fine speech of her own, extolling Garmbelobus from a specifically Corellian point of view. She spoke of how he embodied the bold spirit of his homeworld and the willingness to cooperate, negotiate, and promote ideas of unity that kept both the Five Worlds and the Galactic Alliance together. It was all true enough, but Pelion felt she went on a bit longer than necessary. After all, Belobus hadn't always been a unifier. After his split with Mon Mothma, he'd fought a separate private war against the Empire for over 10 years, and only relinquished his grudge when Coruscant itself was under siege by Grand Admiral Thrawn. Where am I? I lost it. There we go. Stubbornness was, of course, another family Corellian trait, but not one Saxon wished to emphasize right then. Suspecting he wasn't the target audience for this speech, Pelion subtly scanned the crowd of dignitaries for representatives on the Corellian government. He quickly spotted Saxon's Minister of Defense, Thraken Sal Solo, looking like an older, gray-bearded version of his mildly less roguish cousin. Sal Solo listened with his arms crossed over his chest and an impatient look on his face. When Saxon finished her talk, everyone gave another big round of applause, even Fenrir, since the speech didn't praise the rebellion as much. Pelion joined in, but as he glimpsed Sal Solo from the corner of his eye, he watched the man give a few very lazy claps before recrossing his arms very stubbornly. Finally, Cal Alma stepped up to give the final speech. His piece was thankfully short and direct. There's no way to put my admiration and respect for Garmbelobus into words, Alma said. So I won't even try. What I will do is give this great man something close to the send-off he richly deserves. As per his request, his body's been loaded into a capsule that will now be fired from a Guardian's forward torpedo bay and shot into the heart of Corellia's sun. The hollow image of Belobus abyss winked out, making the star sea behind almost visible once more. Their speeches had apparently been better timed than Pelion expected. Right above Omas, directly beyond Guardian's pointed stern, was the bright white glare of Corellia's primary. As Councillor Gonasolo so eloquently put it, we are now living Garm Belobus's dream of freedom and peace. We honored that dream today, so we might continue to live it in the future. Omas turned to face Corellia's son and raised one hand. On that signal, a single projectile shot out from the Guardian's most forward cannon. It had apparently been fitted with the same energy streamers as the Corellian fighters, still keeping honor guard, and its twirling red and white tails flailed behind it as it shot toward the sun. As he watched that projectile dwindle into nothing, taking the body of the great man with it, Pelion wondered again what his funeral would be like. He hoped it would be something like this. He hoped he left a galaxy that was peaceful and secure. He hoped he died like Belobus in his bed. Ouchie, ouchie. Ooh, ooh, that's pretty good. Thank you. You're not here anymore, but thank you, Brennan. Ouchie. Well, for those who haven't read it, ouchie. His mind rolled back through all the other legends and luminaries who had gone before. It seemed like the former rebels had gotten as a whole better deaths than their imperial counterparts. There have been some exceptions, of course. Pelion's predecessor as supreme commander of the combined alliance fleets, Sea and Sub, had died in a spacecraft accident, and Bail Organa had perished with Alderaan. Oh, this has to be after a Dark Nest, but it's fine. But so many others had passed away calmly, like Belobus. Mon Mothma had died before the Yusong Vong War tore up much of what she'd spent her life trying to accomplish. As did old war horses like Jan Dodonna, Ador Talon, Firmiz Nance, Haram Drayson. Akbar slipped away in his pool on Mon Calamari. As for the Imperials, it seemed like they'd all ended badly. Palpatine and Vader, Tarkin, of course, but also Thrawn, the other Grand Admirals, 13 in all, had all died violently. Pestige had been abdicated, but been murdered anyway. Izard gunned down. Kane's shuttle been intercepted by rebel assassins. Krenel and Zinji had been vaporized with their warships. All those old deep core warlords like Hars, Terdok, Talvertis had been poisoned while Pelion had been forced to watch. Others, like that mysterious High Inquisitor Jarek, had gotten themselves killed trying to best the resurgent Jedi Order. She knew the others who died in bed. Aaron Dorja had kicked it just last year, and wily old Willem Dizra had clung on even through the Vong invasion, but they often felt like the exception, not the rule. And the rule seemed to stretch from Palpatine himself all the way down to all the stormtroopers and pilots lost through the attrition of seemingly endless warfare. Men like his son. All in all, Pelion knew it didn't bode well for his own future, which is why he clung to Bel Ilbis's dream as he watched the man's coffin dwindle to nothing and be swallowed up by the light of Corellia's sun. It had never been his dream, but it was all he had left. After the ceremony came the socializing. The mood wasn't a sorrowful one. Garm Bel Ilbis had lived long, died peacefully, left behind a stable union. It was as happy an ending as any being could want. So the plates of food and glasses and wine didn't feel out of place. Even the Hollow News crews fitting around and asking for short words from the assembled luminaries didn't seem crass. Once the podium was cleared, the beings gathered in orderly rows in the decks of Guardian's observation dome, fractioned into disparate clusters. The speeches in honor of Bel Ilbis had extolled the need for unity, and the fact that so many representatives from so many governments across the galaxy were here to respect him was a sign that his dream was in fact being pursued. However, beings fractured nonetheless, and for Tycho Soko, it was interesting to see who fell in with whom, and with which beings avoided each other. Most of the representatives from Corellia's government, for example, fell into a tight circle and talked amongst themselves. Wedge Antilles a little dutifully grabbed some wine and food and went over to join them. Prime Minister Saxon, however, fell into talking with Cal Omas, and after that moved around the deck, exchanging well wishes with other beings, but without dipping into the circle of her fellow Corellians. Tycho wondered how much that had to do with her defense minister. It was well known that Saxon and South Solo didn't see eye to eye personally or politically, and that she'd only appointed him to her cabinet to appease his vocal minority of supporters. South Solo had been a troublemaker for decades, usually at the head of some human first and isolationist populist party, and Tycho was a little surprised to see him present at all. I suppose even if the rest of the galaxy saw Belobus as an Alliance hero first and a Corellian one second, Corellians, or at least South Solo's supporters, saw it the other way around. Merry Christmas, Scott. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Tycho noticed certain other systems forming their own little groups. The Hapans hadn't sent their queen, but their admiral, Lenila Bass, was surrounded by a cluster of similarly statuesque, aristocratic-looking women. At the same time, there were odd pairings. Itan Abat, Treas Krefi talked together at the edge of the chamber. Abat was the only Dornian present, and Krefi seemed to be keeping his distance from the other Bothans in the room, probably because of the convoluted political difference Tycho always had a hard time keeping track of. Two odd men out seemed to have fallen in together. And then, of course, there were the admirals, or the Imperials. Grad Admiral Pelion, now supreme commander of the entire Alliance military, seemed to have fallen into easy conversation with Botwai and Nathal. General Fanir stood at the edge of the conversation, saying nothing, a look of mild distaste on his scarred face. Tycho wondered if it was because he was in a conversation, so-called rebels, so-called subhumans, or both. Whatever Fanir's issue, Pelion didn't seem to have had it. Tycho was glad of that. It had been almost 2 years since Omos had asked Pelion to take command of the military after the untimely death of Admiral Sov. Many beings, Tycho included, felt alarmed at giving such a role to a former Imperial, even one as skilled, experienced, and generally friendly toward former rebels as Pelion. He'd even offered his hesitation in private conversation with Omos, to which the Chief of State replied that if there was a more respected serving military officer in the galaxy, he hadn't heard of one. Oof. Dang, that's good. So this definitely takes place after Darkness. I didn't realize. That's okay though. It's not official, so I can read this out of order. It's fine. I need a break in between the next trilogy that I got to read. So, and I got to read 300 pages of my mom's Stephen King book. So, but yeah, Gilead in charge of the Alliance Navy. I mean, of course, we already know this if you've seen Legacy of the Force, but this is an interesting framing device. Omos had been right. Pelion had been a capable administrator and confidence-inspiring leader, both during the Swarm War and in the peacetime afterward. So this is during the 5-year gap in between Darkness and Legacy of the Force. The fact that he was talking with Bothwai and Nathal now, while Fanir looked on sourly, was proof enough that Pelion was more than just an Imperial now. "Are you all right, Tycho?" asked the woman beside him. Jarred from his reverie, Tycho looked down and blinked. He was standing next to Leia Organa Solo, with Prime Minister Saxon herself in front of him, and let his mind drift, embarrassingly far from either. Tycho put on the polite smile he gradually honed as his ranks improved. "I'm sorry, what was that?" "I'm just asking after Winter," Leia said. "I feel like it's been ages since we've talked." "Winter's doing very well, thank you. Alliance Intel still keeps it in reserve, but she's mostly retired." Retirement. Leia savored the word. "Surprised she hasn't dragged you down the path yourself. I know she's been trying." It was a personal quest from Cal Omos, believe it or not. Tycho tipped his wine glass in the direction of the Chief of State. He was making conversations with the Hapans. It's like imagining Tycho as freaking Leonardo DiCaprio and The Great Gatsby. Old Sport. He promised me I'd just be overseeing and training new pilots. He said he wanted the best and that it would be non-active service only. So far, he's been true to his word. Shifting your attention to Saxon, Leia explained, "General Salko is married to a very good friend of mine. We've known each other since we were growing up on Alderaan. She helped raise my children." I can't imagine you've had your hands full. Saxon nodded. She was taller than Leia, but about the same age, possessed the same assured elegance. Politics and family life tend to step on each other's toes, don't they? Do you have children, Minister Saxon? Tycho asked. She shook her head. No, in fact, I divorced 5 years ago. Oh. Oh. Tycho blinked. Leia said nothing. Showed nothing. She probably already heard. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be. Saxon turned and gestured to the circle of Corellians, which Tycho noted was now bereft of certain Antilles. Do you see the gentleman with dark hair, to the left of Salsoda? Tycho nodded, looked a good decade younger than Saxon herself. I do. That is Denjac's Templar, now my vice minister. And your ex-husband. We're much better political partners than we were any other kind. Tycho didn't understand how that worked and knew he never would, but so he didn't bother to try. Honed diplomatic skill deserted him. All he could say was, well, I'm glad it worked out. With a tight little smile, Saxon asked, and what about you, General? Do you have children? Oh, no. Tycho waved at him. Winder and I we've had plenty of other things to keep us busy. Including my children, Leia added. Tycho was about to ask where Leia's own Corellian husband... Tycho was about to ask where Leia's own Corellian husband was, but it says when. That's a bit weird. Wedge until his wine glass refilled, slipped in the circle. I hope I'm not interrupting anything serious, he said. We were just talking about children, actually, Tycho said with a little smile. Oh, well, I guess I know a few things about that. Are you two daughters well, General? Saxon asked. As Prime Minister of the Five Worlds, it wasn't surprised that she knew more of the local hero, retired or not, than Tycho himself. They're doing well, thank you, says my wife. Sorry she couldn't make it. It's all right, Tycho said. Winter is busy, too. Both glanced at Leia, asking wordlessly where her husband, at this point probably the most famous living Corellian, was, instead of Belobus's funeral. Before she gave an answer, Saxon asked, your daughters are getting old enough to start choosing their own paths, aren't they? Do they plan on following your life path or your wife's? Wedge seemed to hesitate before responding and glanced sideways at Tycho as if he already knew the answer, but Tycho didn't. They hadn't seen each other for almost 6 months before meeting on Guardian just before the funeral ceremony began, and Tycho had reserved a few days' leave to go to Corellia and visit the Antilles home where his old friend was enjoying peaceful retirement. Before Wedge could muster a response, the sound of applause, selectively localized, reverberated from one corner of the deck. All eyes and all holo cameras swiveled to watch as Thraken Sal Solo hopped on top of a chair and raised his glass for a toast. He was ringed by clapping supporters. Templar, Tycho nodded, not among them, and before he spoke, he tugged at the rim of his collar, mussed his hair, giving a slightly roguish tint to his formal look that was as calculated as his seemingly impromptu speech. I want to thank you all for coming here. Sal Solo boomed, loud enough for the whole deck to hear him without a speakerphone. I also want to say how proud I am to be here in honor of the greatest son Corellia's ever had. That got loud clapping from his supporters and more polite applause from a large chunk of the audience that was too confused to do anything else. Garm Bel Elbis was a great man, the kind that embodied all the things that make Corellia great. When the Empire stepped in, wanted Corellia to play by his rules, he said no. When Mon Mothma wanted him to change the way he fought his war, he said no. When Borsk Phala told him to stand back and let the Vaughn run amok over the whole fragging galaxy, he said no. And fought him back on his own terms without any help from the rest of the Alliance. Leia dropped into a mask of practiced restraint, so it's Saxon, but it looked like her mask was about to break in half and reveal an angry Katarn beneath. Still staying on his chair, glass raised, Sal Solo went on. He was his own man through and through. He let no one, and I mean no one, tell him what to do. If that didn't make him the walking, fragging embodiment of all that's good and bold in the Corellian spirit, well, I don't know what does. Another burst of applause. He raised his glass a little higher and said, here's one of you, General. But try not to let you down. He toasted. He drank. He got his applause. Then he ruffled his gray hair again, making it even more messy and rackish, and hopped back down the deck. Tycho muttered. That could have been worse. Gone worse. You want to know where my husband is in the air? Leia frowned as Sal Solo descended back into a ring of admirers and grinned at the journalists scamping to interview him. That's why. That's actually pretty good. Dude, I love Thraken and knowing what happens in Legacy of the Force. I am so glad that he's included in this fanfiction in any way, shape, or form, because more of the jerk that is Sal Solo is a good time to me. Yeah. How much longer do I have? I'm almost done with this page. Yeah, I'm gonna stop the stream after I finish this page. I'm just gonna mention Thraken. Thraken being Thraken. I love Thraken. He's a great villain. Well, Jofendon said as he watched the reporters flock to Sal Solo, that was suitably distasteful. It was the first thing Fenrir had said in 15 minutes, but neither Nudzul nor Bothwell seemed taken aback. The man does have a talent for grabbing attention, John Nudzul said. The Mon Calamari's gravely tones had as much contempt as Fenrir's had. It was a well-played gambit, Bothwell observed, always attuned to politics, even if he didn't like them. The Bothan continued. Prime Minister Saxon refused him a speech, but he got his in with a way that should grab more attention than anyone else's. And he didn't say anything actively treasonous or harsh. It was true, every word, but Urbish could be inconstant. Pelion wasn't surprised to hear a little condemnation in the animal's tone. Condemnation, sorry. Nudzul had a sharper edge than rebel commanders of old. She expected beings to fall into line when ordered and hated when they didn't, even if the rogues were honorable heroes like Belobus. Bothwell said, Belobus is a great man, and now that he's gone, everyone's going to be trying to claim a piece of his legacy. Sal Solo is an ambitious one. It's no surprise he stakes his claim fast. He's a dangerous man, Nudzul said. Bothwell nodded slightly. We should be glad we have Saxon to keep him in check from now. Nudzul made a noise deep in her throat like she didn't really believe it. For the second time, Fenrir spoke up. The Alliance lets men rise to positions of power, proclaiming themselves enemies of everything the Alliance stands for. There's only itself to blame the trouble starts. Make sure that he stays in check, Nudzul said. Not for the first time, Pelion thought Nudzul would have made a decent Imperial Admiral. Sideway glance of Fenrir told him the old Starfighter pilot had just had the same thought and was surprised by it. Pelion cleared his throat and said, For the moment, at least, we have more immediate concerns than Thraken Sir Solo. I look forward to tasting my metal against yours next week, Grand Admiral. That's why he flashed a very toothy, very Bothan smile. We'll be holding exercises next week, Pelion explained to Fenrir. I've heard he'll be using Megador, Fenrir said, naming the largest vessel still in Imperial service. Fenrir may have been retired, but clearly still had friends with ears in the military. It will be a joint operation. The Apens will be involved as well, along with with as small samples from other local defense fleets. The Bothans, the Dorians, even the Krellians. Team building exercise, Fenrir said evenly, though Pelion could hear the tired disdain in his voice. It's important that our units can work together cohesively. During the Shangwang invasion, the European Republic's navy fractured. We can't make that mistake again. But then I hope they have a firm hand to guide them. Fenrir swallowed the last of his wine. Grand Admiral, if you'll excuse me, I have appointments to keep back in Imperial space. See you soon, Pelion raised an eyebrow. Good luck with your exercises, Grand Admiral. He didn't salute, but he did offer one hand for a shake. Pelion took it and squeezed it more firmly than Fenrir squeezed back. He watched the man turn and go. Watched red-banded shoulders and short-cropped hair of blonde fading to white disappear in the crowd. When he turned back to the animals, he found another to join them. The older animal, Klaskin. They were already starting a new conversation, and Pelion excused himself. He felt, if anything, relieved that Fenrir was gone, even if it left him the only Imperial in the room. Somehow he'd come to feel more comfortable among aliens like Bothwell and Nudzul than his own kind. That bothered him, but only when he stopped and dwelled on it. Pelion went over to the refreshment table and refilled his wine glass. Back in the day, he'd been able to put away whiskey like nobody else, but at his age, he had to pace himself. It was already slightly making him weaken the legs. As he turned away from the table, he found himself facing two more alien faces, Trias Krafi and Natan Nabat. Both were officers who had served in the New Republic Navy, but were now retired. Pelion had forged a good working relationship with Krafi during the Yusung-Vong War, but the Bat was a more difficult case. Pelion had never served alongside him, but at Cologne, almost 25 years ago now. The Dornian general delivered him and the Empire a blow from which they never truly recovered. A little awkwardly, Pelion extended his hand and shook theirs. I'm glad the two of you could make it. His funeral has become something of an old officers' reunion. But it's only appropriate to pay respects. I don't mind seeing familiar faces either. And you, General? Pelion shifted to a bot. I understand you've come all the way from Donia. That's right, but I was planning to come forward anyway. The timing was a useful coincidence. What are you coming in for, General? Commander, the Durnian element to your war game exercise is an old friend of mine. He requested that I come and observe. I see. I look forward to your participation. It will be interesting. Abad said vaguely and gave nothing more. Crafty was no fool. He surely knew about Solonon, so he interjected. I've worked with the leader of the Balkan complement. I assure you he's a fine officer. I look forward to seeing how he handles himself against Botway. Crafty and Baltimore made another bit of awkwardness, one Pelly didn't understand as well. Bothan, internal politics made the ones in the Empire look positively straightforward. Hold on a second. You'll be joining us, Admiral, even as an observer. Oh, will you be joining us, Admiral, even as an observer? Crafty waved a white paw. I'm not an admiral. I'm not anything anymore. Just an old Bothan. Comfortably retired, it seems. Old soldiers deserve rest, even if I'm not on your level, or that of the honored dead. Crafty tilted his wine glass to the transparent steel dome, through which the glow of Crowley's primary is still visible. The question is, Grand Admiral, when are you going to retire? One day, perhaps. One day, perhaps. Pelion allowed himself, smiling a little beneath his white mustache. But not quite yet. Well, whenever that day comes, you'll surely deserve it. He raised his glass and held it between the three of them. To Barabas' dream, gentlemen. It was certainly worthy of a toast. Pelion gently tapped his glass against the good Bothan. To the other side was the bots, and Pelion hesitated for a moment before the being who had fought him. For a moment before the being who had fought him and cost him so much. But he tapped the bot's glass anyway, and they drank. Pelion was almost 90 years old, and he had learned how to put things behind him. With the life he lived, the strife he'd seen, the wars he'd fought, it was the only way for a man to stay sane. Well, you know what? That is quite something. That is certainly an interesting way to start this story. I love it. It was a great first, not chapter, I guess, but section. Yeah, already I'm quite liking this story. I just realized I'm reading out of order is the only issue. But I might stop here and just use this as like an interesting, what I have in store for me when I get here. But it was certainly an interesting story for sure, and I'm glad I read it. At least this little section. I love Pelion. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Enjoy this video, or this stream, I guess. Give it a thumbs up or whatever. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Alright, have a Merry Christmas, everyone, and Happy Holidays. Bye-bye.